The United States spends more on their defense budget than China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United Kingdom, India, France, and Japan combined. It accounts for over half of the national budget. Think about that for a second. There's 15 different cabinet departments, all of equal importance, that should each be apportioned their fair share of money. And yet, still, the Department of Defense receives $598 billion a year to run this country. Yes, some of that is used for practical things, such as providing critical supplies to the troops overseas and funding military training, but far too much of it is unnecessary. In order to ensure financial stability in the U.S., encourage the practice of peaceful relations with other nations, and allow for proper funding of other government sectors, the Department of Defense funding should be greatly reduced. In the first, the United States has a $435 billion deficit. Split among citizens, this amounts to more than $1,000 per person. Part of this results from the nearly 54% of the U.S. budget apportioned for Department of Defense, but a large portion results from the increased price of goods. The technology that would have been expensive 10 years ago is twice as expensive now, which not only restricts how much of a tool of war we can buy, but further impedes the quality. Russell Rumbaugh, a retired Army officer and an ex-CIA military analyst, in a report for the Stimson Center wrote, between 1981 and 1990, the Air Force bought 2,063 fighters. In contrast, between 2001 and 2010, it bought only 20. Yet, between 2001 and 2010, the Air Force spent $38 billion of procurement funding just on fighter aircraft in inflation-adjusted dollars, compared with the $68 billion it spent between 1981 and 1990. In other words, the Air Force spent 55% as much money to get 10% as many fighters. Essentially, this means that the price of weapons of war has increased beyond what inflation has predicted, and little regulation when it comes to military contracts means that expensive yet few in quality planes, boats, or any other type of military tool necessary for the function of the military are becoming less and less accessible. In the second, the United States spends so much money specifically because we are involved in so many wars. Intervention in some cases is good, yes, but sending troops to places like Afghanistan and Iraq, even all these years later, is a waste of soldiers' time and the nation's Department of Defense budget. Every unnecessary war the military sends soldiers to fight in is one more meal to buy, one more lodging to pay for, one more base to fund to keep the fighting going. The United States executive branch acknowledged the Vietnam War was doomed to lose approximately 10 years before the war ended, and yet they did nothing. Instead, they allowed the Department of Defense budget to grow in something far costlier than money to be lost: human lives. Due to the existence of so few countries that actually pose a threat to the U.S., keeping around World War II era practices and resources when there is no war on that scale to fight anymore is impractical. Along with Russia, we're the largest manufacturer of nuclear bombs, an eternal stock-up that will never end. And if someone does not intervene soon, we may have an impending arms war in our hands that we are impossible to stop. But worst of all is the severe underfunding of several other cabinet while the Department of Defense flourishes. In order to, 1, provide more adequate funding for departments such as education and Department of the Interior, and 2, prevent a further deficit, the Department of Defense budget must be reduced. We as a nation have moved past bombs and bullets to fight nations we have no stake in. Yes, it would be ideal if all our cabinets had the funding required for them to flourish, but we simply do not. If America wants to pull themselves out of the budget deficit, practice peacekeeping instead of fighting, and give other cabinets the bare minimum to get by, then the government would re-examine the budget and cut it. This country needs it. Thank you.